Okay, Barbara, thank you very much for joining us today. For anyone that's watching that's not familiar with you or who you are, would you just give a little introduction on what you do and what you're going to talk about today?
Sure, guys. First of all, thanks for having me. On the summit, it's a really exciting project to be part of here. So, obviously, my name is Barbara Turley, and I'm the founder and CEO of Virtual Angel Hub, which is a business where we recruit, train, and manage virtual assistants in the Philippines for small businesses all over the world, predominantly in the sort of social media and digital marketing implementation kind of space. So that's basically what I'm doing these days.
Perfect. And obviously, I know you, and we actually have people through your group, and that's why I figured you'd be a great addition to this, and we appreciate your time. And honestly, one of the reasons I picked you was all the systems you had up front. The fact that I had to go through a training before we could go through processes, and making sure I was prepared. And I think you have a really special knowledge in that. So on that point, I know you started this because you had a business, and it started to grow, and you needed help, and you needed systems in place. And I think a lot of business owners out there ask that question of, when is it time to trade some money for some help and to put some systems in place? How do you make those kind of decisions? When do you say, okay, it's time that we need to turn this into a process and we need to get some outside help or some inside help or whatever makes sense?
Yeah, that's a great question actually, because an awful lot of people, you start a business, and of course the whole big thing when you start out is that you have to find your product market fit. You've got to find something that people are going to pay money to you, and that you can sell, and that's the hardest part about startup. So a lot of people focus heavily on that area, and a huge mistake I see an awful lot of people making once they have that right and they've got a business that the product's selling, they know they can scale it, they know there's a market there. The next step they typically do is what I call external leverage, which is they go out and start doing PR and marketing and driving traffic into sites and all this sort of thing before they've done a step that I think is vitally important, which is internal leverage. And that's the point at which you sort of say to yourself, if I'm going to go big with this idea, I need to make sure that the internal workings of my business can actually cope once I get that external leverage moving. So I'm more of a fan of at least starting the process as part of your, if you're creating a marketing drive, well then at least start your systems process just before then and get an idea of kind of the types of operational issues that might come up. Now, it's never perfect because it's an evolving process all the time. And the more you grow, the more problems and the more refining of your processes that will have to happen. But I would love to see more businesses tackle that internal leverage piece just a little bit before they go out to the market and go scaling. I think it would make life less stressful.
Well, I think that brings up a really good question then. So if you're a business owner and you're trying something for the first time, it's your first marketing campaign, it's your first product expansion, how do you sit back and go, what are the likely problems we're going to face? How do you kind of project out and start to prepare for that?
Yeah, so I mean, again, it's tricky because sometimes you don't know the problems until you start marketing. So I'll give the example of some from Virtual Angel Hub. I have a lot of like real life scars and case studies and stories from that particular business. So what I discovered was when I was doing a lot of business coaching, and I discovered that the clients I was working with, they're all small businesses like everybody on this summit right now, and they're all looking for time freedom, which is what we're talking about, and a bit that entrepreneurial freedom dream. So I discovered that most of my clients were struggling with, they had no time. They kind of knew what they wanted to do. They wanted to write the ebook and do the online marketing and get all this stuff going, but they had no time. So the first problem I unearthed was, well, how do I solve this problem of giving them back some time? So I started recruiting VAs. Now, here's the thing. Then the second problem raised its ugly head, and I realized that actually, while time was the problem, the next problem was nobody knew how to actually manage a VA or delegate or put systems in place. And I realized how important that was to actually deliver on this promise that we had for clients. So, so I thought that the problem and the processes I needed were for recruiting. But then quickly after that, I realized, oh my God, I need processes to teach people how to outsource, to actually train VAs properly. So I think, you can kind of, the first step is to at least think about a couple of processes that you're going to need for that first marketing campaign. And then you have to allow time within your business and your planning so that maybe every month you sit back and go, okay, what worked, what didn't, and how do I pause for a second, build another process or refine my process to get rid of the holes? Because there's going to be holes in your processes everywhere. That's always going to happen. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So I guess another good question then is we're talking at this point specifically on virtual assistants, and I think that's something not everyone's familiar with. Like I wasn't familiar with the concept. It was actually in a marketing room that someone brought up and asked for references, and that's how I found you. So probably a lot of people in the summer are not even really familiar with that concept. How would you recommend someone decide between hiring someone in-house or a virtual assistant, or how to know when maybe a remote employee is the right choice, at least for now, or to get started with?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think one of the major reasons people go for a remote employee or a virtual assistant is, let's be honest, typically because it's cheaper. So you can go to the Philippines, you can go to India, there's lots of different countries that you can go to, and you can get highly educated, experienced, great English virtual assistants online, and it's usually cheaper. Cheap doesn't always necessarily mean the best, though, because there's two problems here. The recruiting issue is harder than people think. So I'll give you an idea. Like for every 100 applications that we would get, we might hire two people, and it takes us a long time to get to that point. So the point at which I think you've got to ask yourself, it depends on the tasks that you're really outsourcing. How much time have you got to actually go looking online for somebody in an offshore country? You might be better off, like if you need someone fast and it's someone in your office, sometimes a friend may have someone who is like moms who want to get back into the workforce can be a very interesting place to pick up someone to come into your office and do some work with you. If you're doing live events, often it's probably better to have somebody local. But if your strategies are all online, or you're doing lots of social media and you find yourself up till midnight creating Canva images to put out on your social media, honestly, that's the point at which you need to call Virtual Angel Hub, because really, if you find yourself doing that sort of thing, it's time to look at getting a VA. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's pretty much what happened with me. And I know there are other options. And actually, it's funny. I think there is like a hiremymom.com site or something that's basically like Odesk or whatever, specifically for working moms. So, you do have that option if you want to. So that brings up a good question. So what are the main tasks you would recommend outsourcing to if you were going to consider a regular hire virtual assistant, like a certain number of hours a week? Like, where do you find the best ROI?
Oh, look, for the majority of businesses these days, and I know you'll agree with this, but social media, I mean, at the end of the day, these days you kind of have to have a presence on social media. Even if you're not doing Facebook ads and really driving a hard traffic strategy there, you need to have a brand presence on social media. And I just find, managing your social media content calendars and keeping the train moving is the greatest time sucker ever, and it's not really an effective use of your time as a business owner, where you need to be driving more the sales and the bigger strategy. But it's something that you kind of have these days, because people are going to check out your social media pages, and it's great for branding. Virtual assistants are great at this. This is what is the first task I reckon you should get rid of off your plate. Outside of that, things like the admin in your business, it doesn't matter what business you're in, we all have little bits and pieces that need to be done. That could be responding to live chat on your website, putting blog posts up onto your WordPress site. I mean, making it look nice with images and Google friendly, and all that stuff is stuff that has to happen, but it definitely should not be done by a business owner. So those are kind of the first things that I definitely recommend people get rid of these days.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I think also a lot of, like, we do a lot of websites, and just you need to update plugins constantly. And I think anything that's kind of mundane but has to happen is absolutely a great way to go. So is there anything that you would never consider outsourcing to someone that works remotely?
Look, one of the things, I'll be honest, that I've struggled with outsourcing, now I do know some people that have done this very effectively, is email. So one of the hardest things I think to outsource to a virtual assistant, particularly offshore, is your email, because there's your voice. It depends how you want to do it. And I think to do that effectively, I would always recommend, now some people would disagree with me here, but I think that's one of the last jobs I would probably get your VA to do, because it takes a long time for them to learn your clients, your voice, the types of queries that are coming in. So I would start the process of email early, but by doing this every week, you've got to discuss what came in. There's like a whole pile of training that has to happen around that. So I think it's one of the hardest ones to outsource, but it is possible. And actually, I've interviewed a couple of people on this particular topic, but yeah, that's a hard one to do. So you got to think about that one.
And I'm sure a lot of people that aren't familiar with this process, and one of their big questions is going to be, how do you make sure you're actually getting the work? Like, how do you effectively monitor it? Are we setting just end result goals, or do you recommend actively tracking people? Or there, what's your recommendation for that?
Yeah, look, this is a great question because it's one I struggled with for a very long time. And again, at Virtual Angel Hub, originally when I started the business, I was this real, I wanted to kind of, I'm a very trusting person. It's just my nature to be like that. And I sort of expected everybody to be very trustworthy and honest, and we're all working from home. And look, the majority of people are, but I think you have to be realistic with yourself as well. If somebody is remote, you can do a results-based outcome so that you don't have to micromanage somebody. Now, if you go this route, though, the trick with going that route is to say to yourself, I don't care what happens. I just want the result. But you can't just say, hey, I want X done by this date, and then show up on that date and say, so where is it? You need to actually have an effective reporting and kind of oversight structure between the two of you, or three, or whatever the team is. And a lot of that would be things like daily huddles are really, really important. Could just be a 10-minute daily meeting. A weekly meeting that has a strong structure attached to it and an agenda is really important if you're going to work in this kind of flexible type environment. And also making some rules about the flexibility. So for example, if you're going to allow total flexi, someone in the Philippines potentially could be doing that work for you at 2 o'clock in the morning with a baby on their hip, which is fine, but the quality may slip. So you may have to have some agreements together around when that work is done. Now, from my perspective at Virtual Angel Hub, we tried all that in the beginning. And when you're running a business, we nearly have 70 people now in the Philippines. And realistically, it didn't work for a few reasons. Naturally, as humans, we tend to leave things until the last minute if we're not under some sort of structure. And we actually found that the VAs were happier, not all of them, but on the whole, the general happiness level in the group between clients, VAs, and everyone improved when we put some more structures in place. So we do have time trackers. We do screen trackers. Look, there's a thing called Time Doctor you can use. We only use it with very new VAs these days. And that's more, we say to them, look, it's not to watch what you're doing. It's until you build trust with your client and with us. And then we take it off when we've seen that they are, a supporter of our brand, that sort of thing. So you can sort of use tools, but it's difficult not to fall into the micromanaging thing. So yeah, it's about having structures with flexibility within your structures is the best advice I can give.
I think that brings up a good topic too, and not just for working with remote people, but you're obviously running multiple businesses, large scale. What are your favorite tools right now? You did bring up Time Doctor, but what else are you using?
Yeah, and look, that's another great question because how many people out there are so overwhelmed with the amount of tools that there are? I mean, I almost can't keep up. So a rule I made with myself a couple of years ago was that before I take on and go headlong into a tool, I'll really think about it from a broader business strategy point of view and say, okay, first of all, do we really need this tool, or is it just like a sort of nice to have thing, right? How many tools do we already have? How does it integrate? So I try and keep the number of tools low within the business. And I try and pick tools that do an exceptional amount of things. So for example, I know you know this, Sean, but I'm a huge fan of Entreport, which is the system that I use. And the reason I accidentally fell into it. I didn't really know what I was getting into at the time. I thought it was just a marketing tool. But since then, we've actually built a huge amount of business systems on that one platform, and it integrates beautifully with everything else that we use. So the big one for me is Entreport. We use Asana heavily, which is the project management tool. We're still on the free version. So I just think it's an amazing tool because I have a massive team and we're all still on there. And using Zapier, we can actually integrate it beautifully with Entreport. We use Skype. We haven't moved to Slack because I felt that it's a great tool and I think a lot of people are using it. But for us right now, it's another tool that we'd have to introduce. So we've decided not to do that just at this point. I use an accounting tool called Xero, which I think is great, and it integrates as well with Entreport. And then we use Zoho People, which is a HR platform specific for our business. And that's it. So we tend to keep our tools low. But Asana, if you want to manage a virtual team or even your own self and lots of businesses, Asana is on your iPhone. The app is fantastic. If you want to create freedom, that's how you do it.
Perfect. So one question I'm sure a lot of people have is, how do you address the things you typically address maybe in person, morale or when there's a problem, and how do you have that discussion? I know you said you have a weekly meeting with an agenda.
Yeah.
How do you find that works effectively if people, and even if we're not using virtual assistants, I mean, so many people work remotely. We have a client that they're an international organization that just literally switched to letting everyone work from home. So a lot of businesses are facing that now. How do you effectively address some of those things that typically you would be used to doing face to face?
Yeah, so one thing with Virtual Angel Hub, and I was told many times that I would never make this business work. Every single one of us work virtually. We run virtual daily huddles with lots of teams. So we've got video going on. We're all on there. We run weekly huddles. I mean, the huddle and the scrum technique thing is something that I just got into a couple of years ago, and it really makes a massive difference. It's that connection time with people. And again, you got to have flexibility within the structure. So at the beginning, we might have a laugh, joke of the day, who's, a bit of a story. And then you get straight into it though, and get everyone to kind of, keep firing through their questions. The other thing we have introduced is a recognition program. So what we're doing internally at Virtual Angel Hub, obviously all the VAs are working with different clients, but we've got an internal, it's kind of a help desk and it's a Facebook group. But in there, we're starting to build this recognition program where if a VA helps another VA, they can give them a star, they can give them a thumbs up. And then at the end of each quarter, we'll build bonuses based on that. So now that's something that works very effectively in the Philippines, but it increases the engagement between everyone. So when you're virtual, you have to make an effort to get everyone together virtually. You don't have to be in the same room, but you can't just let it all slip and let everyone just do their job. Get collaboration going more, and the magic happens when you do that. Definitely.
Well, and you mentioned the Scrum techniques that you started using in particular. What, as a business owner, what part of those do you think is most important to adapt? How would you recommend someone get started with some of those? What pieces have been most important to you?
Yeah, so with meetings, the biggest challenge people face with meetings is ineffective meetings that don't go anywhere and there's no result. So before you start, look, the easiest way to start is to start, right? And to say, we're going to have a 10-minute meeting, right? Now, a 10-minute meeting with 5 people is tricky because you've got 2 minutes each. So you have to have, and in the beginning, it'll be a disaster, right? It'll be a half an hour and nobody will actually get to the point. So it's about saying to each other, it's about having somebody lead it, but also making everybody else on the team in the meeting understand the purpose of the meeting, what we're trying to achieve. And then it can actually become quite a fun exercise because everyone's like, oh, that was a disaster. So the next one you want to refine. Everything's about refining. So don't get annoyed and give up. Just everything is about refining your process each time. Every time a mistake happens, look at your process and say, well, that was a monumental screw up. How do we change our process now to make sure that this doesn't happen again, or we minimize the chances of it? And that's the same if you're having a meeting or if you've got like a massive client problem that's happening or whatever. So it's just about, just start and evolve the process as you go.
Perfect. I think one question you'd be particularly good at answering that probably people are wondering too. If you're outsourcing abroad specifically, obviously cultural differences are going to come up. And I remember actually at Traffic and Conversion, I think we talked about this, they brought up when it came to writing, they were like, the Philippines specifically, they said Philippines relationships are very similar to America, so they understand marriage and wedding and whatever, but they don't have guns. So if you're trying to write like for, conservative politicians, they don't understand that. For guns, they don't understand that. When you're deciding, or if you're deciding to outsource, how do you kind of figure out what some of those might be? And then when you get into it, how do you prepare for some of those cultural and language differences that might be hiccups?
Yes, and that's a great question. And that's like oh my God, we could talk a whole podcast about this or a whole show. So cultural differences. I think, look, again, when I started out doing this, I sort of learned a lot of this by accident because you don't know this stuff when you start, but you've got to think about it's definitely worth kind of not studying, but having a read up on the history of a country and understanding like how those belief systems and everything sort of permeate through a culture. So for example, in the Philippines, something I learned the hard way is that I knew they were kind of a yes culture. So you got to be careful when somebody goes, yep, yes, no problem, noted, yes, and they keep saying yes. So you have to kind of probe with questions, because even if you say to them, look, I know it's a yes culture and you might want to say yes all the time. You don't have to, or please talk to me. That won't work, because you're kind of going up against a brick wall of a belief that's already there. So it's up to you to kind of, first of all, realize that that is there. And second of all, ask questions to bring out the gold. Now, it's something that's tricky to do, but you learn it over time. Another way of doing it is to kind of, again, I think the huddles help. I think this has helped me a lot, to kind of go, where are you stuck? Because that's quite a direct question. So where are you stuck? And they're going to go, well, actually, I don't know how to do it, or I need more training or whatever. So I think it's just about having open communication and you recognizing that those differences can impact the way work is done. Another one in the Philippines to really know, they are obsessed with saving face. So what I mean by this, somebody will actually resign from a job, even if their family relies on the money heavily. They will resign from a job if they feel they may have embarrassed themselves, and they will not come back. It does not matter what you say. You could offer to pay them more money, they probably won't come back. So that can be really, really frustrating. So, that's a challenge. So it's about knowing that before you go into it.
Okay. And I think a solid follow up to that, and this is something I've learned to deal with, but how about the time difference? Like, there's obviously a massive time difference between where I am and some of the people that I've hired through you. So it's not your typical office situation. I can't, like, I turn to Britt and go, hey, where are we on this project, or track for those things. What's an effective way to still track progress and keep making forward momentum when maybe you can't actively go back and forth during their workday?
Yeah, so just on that, as you know, I've been toying with this, how to service 24 hours for a long time. And, in the Philippines, one thing I have learned, particularly in the Philippines, there's a huge night market over there. A huge amount of people work at night. There's cafes open. It's this whole sort of vibe going on over there. So we are about to put on a night shift. But if you're not doing that, which you're not doing at the moment, um, the best way to do it is, again, you've got to have a check-in time. There's got to be some form of overlap in the time. And if there isn't during their workday, potentially you can push an hour of it and say, well, every evening your time, we have an hour together where you have the huddles, there's the check-ins, there's the run through everything. The actual work that they need to do, I guess, can be done whenever, like, if it's in your nighttime, but you definitely have to have that connection point. You can't just have a once a week meeting, I don't think. I think you have to make the effort to try and get a crossover of time zone.
Okay. Well, and we found, I mean, I'll forward emails during the day as they come in, and we put things in Asana when I remember to use it, because I'm not the best, I'm not going to lie. But we found that does work as long as I keep them updated. We found a pretty good, I mean, it hasn't been an issue. I was just curious if there were certain techniques that maybe I should have been utilizing, but I wasn't.
Yeah, no, that's it. And it's having, yeah, communication's key. Project management tools are key, but but that check-in time, some clients we have found, they'd fail with the VA. And then when we dig, we find, well, the VA will be like, well, they were away on holiday for 3 weeks, or I didn't hear from them, or we only talk every month. I'm like, well, that's not going to work. Like, that's just, somebody working at home on their own in the Philippines, you can go, they can get demotivated by having no connection with you. So yeah, it's important.
Okay, I think we have time for about one more question, so let's ask the biggie. What's the number one mistake you see people making when they're trying to outsource business?
Oh, yeah. So there's a couple of layers to this one. So the biggest mistake is not having processes. I mean, it's just fundamentally, you will absolutely 100% fail if you don't have a set of some form of process mapping within your business. Now, you can build it with a VA together if you haven't started that, but it's not even about virtual. Actually, that's not about virtual teams. That's about business in general. Processes and systems are really important. But the next layer of that, because sometimes we see people doing everything we told them to do. They build their processes, they do it all really well. And the next layer is abdicating responsibility of the process instead of delegating. So those are different things. Delegation means that 80% of it is done by the person you delegated it to, and 20% of it is you doing oversight as the business owner and them reporting back to you and you engaging somehow. People tend to give the process and say, oh, great, that's done, and there's that's a huge mistake to do that, particularly with offshore people. even if it's in an area where you have no expertise. Let's say it's a coder. I would probably say it's worth you getting your head a bit around what you're trying to achieve, even if you're hiring somebody with expertise outside of your thing, because otherwise, how are you going to, you just can't lead that if you don't really know what it is that's happening or how to ask the right questions. And the third layer, so even when people do that, communication. I mean, it's just the number one sort of thing that will trip people up who've done everything else right, and their communication style, it doesn't match the communication style of the person they're trying to work with, and that's an extraordinarily difficult thing to get right. It doesn't always work. So yeah, there's a couple of layers to that whole question.
Well, I think communication, I find this too. I tend to be dry and sarcastic and not realize it. And through email, that doesn't always come across. So this one reminds me once in a while that she's like, okay, you're coming off a little harsher than you need to. And I don't even get it. So to your point, I think the actual conversations are great, and being aware of that obviously is important.
Yeah, email's true. You gotta be careful with email because tone and things like that don't come across properly. So somebody can be offended by accident, and you're like, "No, I didn't mean that." So it's that sort of thing. You got to be watch for that kind of thing.
Yeah, that happened to me in college actually once. It was a professor. I was running some organization, and a professor sent me an email that I read the wrong way, and I lost it. I was like, what are you? She's like, no. She's like, read it in this tone, and then see. I'm like, oh, okay.
Oh, I see. Yeah, because you don't know what personal issues are being triggered by words you've used, or you just don't know. So yeah, jump on Skype and video. Try to do as much video as you can with offshore people, even if they don't want to. Just say, like, look, let's jump on video because you can see the expressions and you get to know each other deeply in that scenario. Yeah.
I think this has been really great. Anyone that wants to stay in contact with you or maybe discuss more virtual angel hub, or is there somewhere else you want them to go? I know you're doing blogs and.
Oh, we've got lots going on. It's all housed at Virtual Angel Hub. So virtualangelhub.com. You can head over there. We've got lots of content going on over there. We've got a podcast called Virtual Success, which you can access there as well. You can also book a call to talk to one of our outsourcing strategy consultants. So I've got a great guy in Australia who loves outsourcing, and he's an amazing guy. He talks to lots of people, and we're about to put someone on in Ireland actually. So we're going to be servicing the US market from there. So that's actually an exciting next chapter for us. So
Sean Patrick, I can appreciate that. That's good,
yeah.
Okay, that sounds great. Well, we'll probably be able to add a link to some of that stuff under the video too, so people can connect with you directly.
Great. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yes, thank you. This is great, and I think again, I think for a lot of people, and for me, even though I'm doing it, like it's still helpful to have this information.
I never look. You never stop learning and growing. I mean, I've been doing it for a long time, and I'm still going. Oh, we need to fix that process. Oh, look at that hole. So it's never ending.
No, never. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Bye, Bar.
Bye.